Your $600 soundbar might be sounding like a $100 one right now, and the part responsible for that isn't the soundbar itself, it isn't your TV, and it isn't any setting you've missed in any menu. It's the HDMI cable sitting between your TV and your sound system. A cable that looks perfectly normal probably works fine for video and gives you no obvious sign that anything is wrong. The sound comes out, the system appears to be functioning, but somewhere between your TV and your soundbar, the audio is being quietly bottlenecked, downgraded, or randomly dropping out in ways that can completely undermine the experience you paid for. Today I'm going to explain exactly why this happens, how to identify whether your cable is the problem, and what the actual fix looks like. Subscribe and hit the like button before we get into this. And drop a comment telling me what soundbar or AV receiver you're using, and whether you've ever experienced audio dropouts, random fallback to stereo, or Atmos not showing up the way it should. Let's sort this out. Why HDMI cables are not all the same for audio? Most people assume that an HDMI cable is an HDMI cable. As long as it's plugged in and the picture is working, it must be doing everything correctly. For video, this assumption is often close enough to true that you'd never notice a problem. But for audio traveling through the ARC or eARC channel, the cable's quality, certification, and bandwidth capability matter in a very direct and audible way. Here's the background that makes this clear. HDMI ARC, which stands for Audio Return Channel, was designed over a decade ago to allow audio to travel backwards through an HDMI cable from the TV to a connected soundbar or receiver. Standard ARC supports around 1 megabit per second of audio bandwidth. That's enough for compressed formats like Dolby Digital and basic PCM stereo, and for its time it was a useful convenience feature. But when Dolby Atmos and other modern high-bitrate lossless formats became mainstream, 1 megabit was nowhere near sufficient to carry them reliably. eARC, the enhanced audio return channel introduced with HDMI 2.1, was the answer to this limitation. eARC supports up to 37 megabits per second of audio bandwidth, which is 37 times what standard ARC offers. That bandwidth is what makes it possible to carry lossless Dolby True HD, DTS HD Master Audio, full object-based Dolby Atmos from Blu-ray discs, DTS X, and uncompressed multi-channel LPCM audio up to 32 channels in theory. The jump from standard ARC to eARC isn't an incremental improvement. It's a fundamental change in what the connection is capable of delivering. The problem is that the physical HDMI cable itself needs to be capable of reliably supporting that 37 megabit bandwidth for eARC to function correctly. Many older cables that carry the high-speed HDMI label were designed to meet the specifications for HDMI 1.4 or 2.0, which were written before eARC existed and don't guarantee the sustained bandwidth that eARC requires for stable handshaking and full lossless audio delivery. An older or lower quality cable plugged into your TV's eARC port doesn't simply perform at a lower level. It can cause the devices to fail the eARC handshake entirely, resulting in a fallback to standard ARC or even PCM stereo. It can cause random audio dropouts where the connection momentarily fails and has to re-establish itself. It can cause inconsistent behavior where Atmos works sometimes but not others, or where certain apps seem to produce better audio than others for no obvious reason. Understanding the symptoms that point to the cable before we go into the fix, it's worth going through the specific symptoms that indicate a cable problem rather than a settings problem or a device incompatibility. These are the patterns that, once you know what to look for, make the cable the obvious suspect. The first and most common symptom is audio that randomly cuts out for a second or two and then returns, sometimes accompanied by the soundbar switching inputs momentarily. This dropout pattern is characteristic of an unstable eARC handshake, where the connection is being re-established intermittently, often because the cable can't maintain the sustained data rate that eARC requires. The second symptom is audio that persistently shows as PCM stereo or standard Dolby Digital on your receiver's display when you're playing content that should be delivering Dolby Atmos or another advanced format. This happens when the eARC negotiation fails entirely and the connection falls back to standard ARC or its lowest common denominator. Stripping out all the advanced format information and delivering the most basic audio the connection can reliably carry. You'll see this on the front panel of your AVR or in the soundbar's companion app, where the format indicator stays on DEED or PCM regardless of what content you're playing. The third symptom is SEC control problems. Specifically, your TV remote failing to control your soundbar's volume or the soundbar not turning on and off with the TV. SEC communication travels through the HDMI connection. And while SEC uses a very low bandwidth signal that even an older cable can usually carry, a severely degraded or poorly shielded cable can sometimes cause SEC signaling to be unreliable as well, manifesting as inconsistent behavior where one remote control works sometimes and fails at other times. The fourth symptom is Atmos working in some apps but not others. If Netflix seems to trigger Atmos on your soundbar but Disney Plus or Amazon Prime doesn't, the instability of the eARC handshake can cause some apps that have slightly different audio output timing or behavior to miss the successful negotiation window. This inconsistency is a strong indicator that the connection itself is marginal rather than any specific app being at fault. The fifth symptom is lip sync issues that don't respond to manual sync correction in your TV's settings. One of the improvements eARC introduced over standard ARC is mandatory reliable lip sync correction. Standard ARC handled lip sync inconsistently and optional, which is why many ARC setups required manual delay adjustment. eARC should handle this automatically when the connection is established correctly. If your audio and video remain out of sync even after adjusting the available settings, a failed or marginal eARC connection that's forcing a fallback to standard ARC can explain the persistence of the problem. The specific fix, what to check and replace? Now let's walk through the actual solution, because understanding the problem is only useful if you can act on it. The first check is confirming the physical connection is correct. Your TV has multiple HDMI ports, and only one of them is the eARC port. They all look identical from the outside, but only the labeled one has the eARC circuitry behind it. Check the back or side panel of your TV and find the port specifically marked ARC or eARC. On most modern televisions, this is labeled directly next to the port, sometimes small enough to require a flashlight to read clearly. Your HDMI cable must be connected to that specific port and nowhere else. Even a perfect cable plugged into the wrong port will never achieve eARC connectivity because the other ports simply don't have the feature. Once you've confirmed the port, the critical fix for most people experiencing these symptoms is replacing the HDMI cable with a certified ultra-high-speed HDMI cable, which corresponds to the HDMI 2.1 specification. This is the cable standard designed to support the full 48 gigabit per second bandwidth of HDMI 2.1, which more than covers the 37 megabit eARC audio requirement with substantial headroom. Certified ultra-high-speed cables go through testing to confirm they can actually sustain that bandwidth reliably. And they carry certification markings including a CR code and certification ID on the packaging that you can verify at hdmi.org or through the official HDMI cable certification app. The word certified matters here because the HDMI cable market has a significant problem with mislabeled products. It's common to find cables labeled HDMI 2.1 or ultra high speed that haven't actually been certified and cannot reliably support the bandwidth they claim. For a connection as sensitive to marginal performance as eARC, buying an uncertified cable is a gamble. Look for the ultra high speed HDMI logo on the packaging, the QR code that links to the official certification registry, and the 17-character certification ID. These aren't marketing extras. They're the only reliable way to confirm the cable has been independently tested. Cable length is also worth considering. Certified ultra-high-speed HDMI cables work reliably at short lengths, typically up to 1 to 2 meters, for most off-the-shelf options. For longer runs, cable quality and construction become more critical, and some budget options rated for short distances may not maintain consistent performance at longer lengths. If your TV and soundbar or receiver are more than about 6 feet apart, check that the specific cable you're buying is rated and certified for that length at full 48 gigabit bandwidth. The settings that need to be correct alongside the cable, replacing the cable alone, may not be enough if the TV's audio settings are also directing audio through the wrong path or in the wrong format. These settings need to match the physical connection for ARC to deliver correctly. In your TV's audio or sound settings menu, find the audio output option and set it to external speaker, audio system, or HDMI ARC or eARC depending on how your TV labels it. Make sure it is not set to TV speakers, which routes all audio through the TV's internal speakers regardless of what's connected to the eARC port. The digital audio output format setting is equally important. Set this to auto, passthrough, or bitstream rather than PCM. PCM tells the TV to convert whatever audio it's receiving into basic uncompressed digital audio before sending it out, which strips away all Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, and advanced format information before it ever reaches your soundbar. Bitstream or pass-through tells the TV to send the original encoded audio format directly without conversion, preserving all the advanced format data so your soundbar or receiver can decode it properly. Enable HDMI-CEC in your TV settings as well. Different brands label this differently. Samsung calls it AnyNet Plus, LG calls it SimpleLink, Sony calls it Bravia Sync, and Vizio calls it SEC. Whatever name your TV uses, find it and turn it on. Even if your soundbar's SEC implementation isn't perfect, the TV typically requires SEC-C to be enabled for ARC and eARC to function correctly. Disabling SEC on the TV can prevent ARC from initializing properly even when the cable and port are correct. The power cycle reset that fixes handshake issues. Even after replacing the cable and correcting the settings, a stale or failed HDMI handshake from the previous connection can persist and prevent the new cable from being recognized correctly. The solution is a full power cycle that forces both devices to re-establish the connection from scratch. Turn off both the TV and the soundbar or receiver. Unplug both devices from the wall completely, not just turn them off with the remote. While they're unplugged, physically disconnect the HDMI cable from both ends and then firmly reconnect it to make sure the connection is clean and secure. Leave everything unplugged for 30 to 60 seconds, then reconnect power. Turn the TV on first and let it fully boot, then turn the soundbar or receiver on second. This power sequence gives the TV time to initialize the eARC port before the connected device attempts to negotiate, which improves the reliability of the initial handshake. After the power cycle, play Atmos content and check the format indicator on your soundbar's display or companion app. If the handshake was successful and the cable is capable, you should see Dolby Atmos, Dolby True HD, or DTS:X depending on the source content, rather than the PCM or basic Dolby Digital you may have been seeing before. That format change on the display is your confirmation that eARC is now working correctly and your soundbar is receiving the audio it was designed to decode. Firmware and long-term maintenance. One more factor worth checking once the physical connection is correct is firmware on both your TV and your soundbar or receiver. Manufacturers regularly release firmware updates that address ARC compatibility and handshake bugs. And some of the most frustrating intermittent ARC or ARC issues have been resolved through firmware updates that most users never applied because automatic updates weren't enabled. Go into your TV settings and check for available updates. And do the same for your soundbar through its companion app or the device's own settings menu. If your devices have been sitting on the same firmware since purchase, there may be stability and compatibility improvements available that address the exact symptoms you've been experiencing. Here's what the complete picture looks like. The HDMI cable connecting your TV to your soundbar or AV receiver is not an insignificant accessory. For eARC to function correctly and deliver the lossless, high bitrate audio your system is capable of, that cable needs to be a certified ultra-high-speed HDMI 2.1 cable connected to the specific ARC or eARC labeled port on your TV. With your TV's audio output set to bitstream or pass-through rather than PCM, HDMI-CEC enabled, and firmware current on both devices. When one of those elements is wrong, the symptoms range from random dropouts to complete fallback to compressed audio, and the whole experience feels like your premium system is underperforming for no obvious reason. The actual fix is often a $15 cable and 5 minutes in your TV's settings menu. That's the gap between an expensive soundbar sounding average and finally sounding like what it was designed to deliver. Check your cable tonight, verify your port, confirm your settings, and do the power cycle reset. If you were previously seeing Dolby Digital where you expected Dolby Atmos, watch for that format indicator to change, because that moment when your soundbar's display shows Atmos for the first time is when you'll understand exactly what the cable was silently preventing. If this video helped you identify and fix the issue, hit that like button and share it with anyone else who's been frustrated by inconsistent or degraded audio from a system they know should sound better. Drop a comment telling me what format your soundbar now shows after making the switch. And subscribe because there's more practical home theater content like this on the way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.